This presentation is designed to talk a little bit about what happens in America in terms of politics after Andrew Jackson. So Andrew Jackson is elected in 1828, and he will eventually serve until 1836. So through these 8 years as President of the United States, Jackson will essentially change the nature of the position of president. The position of president will be a lot more powerful. Even though Jackson believed in average people having power, it was his type of average people. And he would continue this belief and promote this Democrat Party to immigrants, to Catholics, to labor, to the working class. And his successor would be his campaign manager, his best friend, his vice president, but also a northerner, Martin Van Buren. And Martin Van Buren comes from a very well-established family in New York, a Dutch family. The Van Burens had lived in New York since the early Dutch settlement of New York. But Martin Van Buren knew that his ticket to politics was to connect to Andrew Jackson, a charismatic leader who had the voice of the people. So Martin Van Buren became an early organizer of the Democrats in New York State. And here we see that the Democrats were not a sectional party originally. Although Martin Van Buren himself was not a fan of slavery, his beliefs in the Democratic Party stemmed from the beliefs that average people should have more of a say in government and that states should have more rights. Eventually, Martin Van Buren, this president who's a Democrat, one of the founders of the Democratic Party, will leave the Democratic Party because of the rift over slavery. So Martin Van Buren will be this free soil candidate who will run for president in the later 50s. But at the end of Martin Van Buren's term, he's challenged by an up-and-coming leader who is well established across America, well known for his war service, this man, William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison, although older, was new to politics. He had been a governor of the Indiana Territory, which was a territory created out of the West early on in the 1800s, but he really hadn't served much in politics. His claim to fame was his moniker, Old Tippecanoe. Old Tippecanoe was his name as a general for winning the Battle of Tippecanoe and the eventual war against Tecumseh, who was the leader of a rogue group of Native Americans who were fighting against America in the early 1800s, right about the time of the War of 1812. And after his victory at Tippecanoe, they were able to expand the United States further into the West. So William Henry Harrison has been remembered as this war hero, famous for allowing us this idea of manifest destiny, able to move to the West. But William Henry Harrison's a Southerner. He's from Virginia. But he's chosen by the Whigs because he has notoriety. He has charisma. People respect this man. And when he runs against Harrison in 1840, he is successful and wins the presidency. Perhaps the most interesting fact, though, about William Henry Harrison was the fact he was president the shortest amount of days. For when he becomes president, he makes a 2-hour speech at his inauguration, the longest inaugural speech in history. He makes this speech in the middle of a rainstorm and eventually contracts pneumonia and soon after dies. William Henry Harrison had selected as his running mate John Tyler. John Tyler, also from Virginia, was a Democrat / Whig / no party. We look at John Tyler in a very strange way because although he was considered a Whig, he sympathized with slavery, he sympathized with the South. The only thing that kept him a Whig was that he was against Jackson. So he was an example of members of the Whig Party who believed pretty much the same thing as the Democrats, except they were not in favor of Jackson as being president. So when John Tyler becomes president, otherwise known as his accidency because he becomes president by accident, he's looked at in a strange way by both Whigs and Democrats. John Tyler has trouble convincing both parties that he is a viable candidate. And in the end, John Tyler is not able to secure a nomination for re-election at the end of that term. At the end of the term, the Democrats seek out a candidate who can defeat any Whig running against them. And the Whigs, they have a candidate who they've run many times, Henry Clay. Henry Clay, otherwise known as the perennial candidate, is one of the major leaders of the Whig Party. Henry Clay has been in office since the early 1800s. He's well known for his compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise, and Henry Clay is looked at by the Whig Party as the best chance for victory. He is from Kentucky. He is a moderate. He is a conservative Whig. Although he is not for slavery, he is a slave holder. He does not necessarily want to expand slavery, but he wants both the South and the North to have a balance. He wants to keep the Union together. And Henry Clay's belief is that it's better to make a compromise than it is for one group to win out over the other at the expense of almost half of America. So Henry Clay is looked at as being the next president. The Democrats, however, look to a Southerner, a protege of Andrew Jackson, to be their dark horse candidate. They can't find a Democrat who they can get behind. So as a result, they choose this man, James K. Polk. He's known as the dark horse again because he was not necessarily the front runner. He was not somebody expected to run for president. But the Democrats knew that in the image of Andrew Jackson, this man, James K. Polk, the governor of Tennessee, could rise up and be that new presidential candidate, a man of the people, a man that people would respect. And in the end, in 1844, in the great election between James K. Polk and Henry Clay, James K. Polk wins. In the next years, James K. Polk would get America involved in its greatest war of yet, the Mexican-American War. The results of the Mexican-American War would change the nature of America, expanding almost a third of the size of America and creating a system whereby slavery would be expanded into the new territory. James K. Polk would be an advocate of war in order to fulfill the idea of manifest destiny, from shore to shore, from sea to sea. And this really would create the beginning of our major sectional conflict.